Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dietrich and I have been a fan of Law & Order since ADA Jack McCoy was the new guy on the show. While binge watching some season 18 Connie Rubirosa action lately, it struck me that Law & Order is not just a police procedural drama, it is also a time capsule of life in America. And since the oldest episodes are 35 years old as I write this, I thought it would be interesting to look back on the series as a whole. What I am going to do is make top 10 lists of the best episodes from every season based on my personal preference, cultural significance, and the episode's significance to the show itself. This is obviously going to be a very long-term project, which will probably eventually encompass SVU, Criminal Intent, and the various other spin-offs in this convoluted Law & Order universe. So if this sounds like something that you would like to see, please subscribe to this channel and drop me a preemptive like to encourage me to persevere on this potentially years-long journey. I will start off each of these top 10 lists with a summary of where the show and its cast is at the beginning of the season, and since this is the very first season, I will have to begin at the beginning. Season 1 of Law & Order aired on NBC from September 13th, 1990 to June 9th, 1991. The principal cast for Season 1 is Chris Noth as Detective Mike Logan, George Dzunda as Sergeant Max Greevey, Dan Florek as Captain Donald Cragen, Richard Brooks as ADA Paul Robinette, Michael Moriarty as Executive ADA Ben Stone, and Stephen Hill as DA Adam Schiff. The original pilot episode was filmed in 1988 for CBS, 2 years before the series finally debuted on NBC. For the pilot episode only, Roy Thynes played District Attorney Alfred Wentworth. This actor and character were replaced by Hill as Schiff once regular series production commenced because Thynes was committed to another television series by that time. Season 1 of Law & Order was released on DVD on October 15th, 2002 as Law & Order the First Year, and it is the fattest of all the Law & Order DVD box sets because they use single-sided DVDs for it. The first season of Law & Order is currently available for streaming on Hulu as I type this, but of course that could change in the future. What probably won't change is the fact that this show will rerun in syndication until the sun burns out. Guest stars for Season 1 of Law & Order include William H. Macy, Samuel L. Jackson, Phillip Seymour Hoffman in his very first ever television role, Uncle Frank from Home Alone, Miranda from Sex and the City, Mercutio from the best version of Romeo and Juliet, Don't At Me, the annoying sister-in-law from The Ref,
Okay, bye.
All right, get in the car!
the DA from LA Confidential cross-examining the sales manager from Suckers, the guy from Goodfellas with the tip about the Lufthansa heist, the guy from King of New York who got his shoes peed on, the driver for evil Dr. Jonas in Twister, the jerk doctor from Silence of the Lambs, and Courtney B. Vance, who would go on to play ADA Ron Carver on Law & Order Criminal Intent, but he will always be Jonesy from Hunt for Red October to me.
And I think when he gets confused, it kind of runs home to Mama.
I would also like to issue a brief spoiler and content alert. If you haven't seen these reruns on MeTV yet and you don't want the ending spoiled, or if you don't want to hear about the sorts of murders and assaults that happened on a hard-hitting late-night cop show, please go watch one of my videos about cars. I've made hundreds of them. So without further ado, let's get on to the top 10 Law & Order episodes for Season 1. At number 10, we have the very first episode of Law & Order that ever aired, Prescription for Death. Written by David Black and Ed Zuckerman and directed by John P. Whitesell II. This was not the first episode ever filmed, but we will get to that momentarily. This episode begins with a cold open in a chaotic emergency room with this guy inquiring about where his daughter is at. It turns out she is in the back being defibrillated by a bunch of very nervous-looking doctors and nurses. She flatlines and kicks the bucket, and we have the very first of many victims of foul play in the Law & Order universe. Fun fact, that first victim was played by Erika Jayne, who would later star in Real Housewives of Beverly Hills and make a bunch of music 25 years later. To me, her uncredited role as the first ever stiff on Law & Order is much cooler. The father who was looking for Erika Jayne was a medic in Vietnam. Here is our first small time capsule moment. At the time this episode aired, the Vietnam War had only ended 16 years prior. He convinces Greevey and Logan to investigate the case.
He was very convincing.
And they discover some whiteout on the victim's medical chart, the medication under the whiteout being a narcotic painkiller. The victim had also been taking a strong antidepressant, and those two medications are contraindicated, and that's what killed the lady.
Nobody takes meperidine and phenelzine, unless they want to risk ending up here.
So the Vietnam medic was right. She wasn't that sick. In the investigation into how the narcotic got prescribed, we learned that Sergeant Greevey distrusts doctors because of a mistaken diagnosis he'd received a few years back, and Detective Logan is more willing to give the doctors the benefit of the doubt because his father was saved by a heart transplant. The cops discovered that the chief of medicine of the hospital was on rounds the night that Erica Jane died, and he was also intoxicated, and he was the one that ordered she get the narcotic painkiller. We also learned that Captain Cragen is a recovering alcoholic who started going to AA meetings a few years back at the behest of his then partner Greevey. The detectives end up gathering enough evidence on the chief of medicine practicing medicine while drunk.
He was drunk.
To make an arrest, and the case moves on to Stone and Robinette to prosecute. While doing research on case law, Robinette laments the lack of a computerized database for malpractice lawsuits.
Where are computers when you need them?
During the trial, it comes out that the chief of medicine had attended rehab, indicating that he knew he had a problem, except for the fact that he straight told the counselor at the rehab he was at that he was not an alcoholic and he checked himself out early. The case looks like it could go either way, but Stone catches a lucky break when the court has a lunch break right before he cross-examines the chief of medicine and chief suspect, and Stone has Greevey tail the guy. Turns out he has 6 drinks at lunch, and in a dramatic turn of events, Stone asks the chief of medicine about it on the stand and then administers a field sobriety test right there in the courtroom, which he fails. Greevey asked Stone how he knew, and Stone said it was because his father used to do the same thing every day at lunch. As a first episode of a series, I think Prescription for Death does an amazing job. We get introduced to the characters, the format of the show, and overall it is a very solid investigative story. Still, who could have known that this would be the first of hundreds of episodes and hundreds of millions of dollars changing hands over the next 35 years. At number 9, we have the pilot episode of Law & Order entitled Everybody's Favorite Bagman, written by Dick Wolf and directed by John Patterson. As I said before, this pilot was filmed 2 years before the show was picked up, so in many ways it has a different feel to the rest of the shows in season 1. The sets are different, Greevey is thinner, even the grain on the film is different. But if you look past all that, it's actually shocking how much Dick Wolf captured what he was going for in the first episode of the series he created. The episode opens with 2 patrol cops who happen along what appears to be a robbery in progress. It turns out there's a severely injured man in the car that they thought was being robbed, and he is a city councilman named Charles Halsey. Greevey is initially unhappy about paying $2.75 for a ham sandwich in a bodega that apparently allows smoking, and then he is unhappy about catching this particular case because he doesn't like press cases. Greevey tells Logan that the rumor was that Halsey, who now campaigns on stopping violent crime, used to be a bagman, which is someone who transports and delivers large amounts of money for organized crime, just in case you didn't know. This leads to one of my all-time favorite Mike Logan quotes.
Oh, this really frosts my cookies, Max.
They check the councilman's car and find a fur coat in the trunk, which will turn out not to be for the councilman's wife. The detectives manage to track down the 2 kids who the patrolman saw messing with Halsey's car, which leads to the earliest example of possible excessive force in the Law & Order extended universe. During their interrogation, Logan pulls a fast one and makes everyone believe the councilman croaked. So the kids panic a little bit and they tell the story that they just robbed the councilman after he had been assaulted. They claim there was a delivery truck in the area at the time, and Greevey and Logan track down this guy, who is always good for some information. Between the guy from Goodfellas and the furrier who made the fur coat they found, they put together that the most likely suspect is Tony Scalise, a member of the Masucci crime family. We will see more of them later on in this list. Greevey and Logan make Robinette out to be the new guy, which is fair enough considering this was the pilot episode. Technically, they were all the new guys.
Name's Robinette.
20 says he won't file.
These defensive bets are gonna kill you.
But perhaps confusing to viewers who were there from episode 1, since this was the 6th episode that aired. At this point, the detectives are also making Stone out to be some sort of total hard-ass, and they sort of goad Robinette into telling Stone that a police commander named Jefferson has been sniffing around about the case. It turns out that Jefferson is a black man who perjured himself in one of Stone's previous prosecutions, but coached Robinette's Little League team and inspired him to become a lawyer. They have their differences, but keep working on the case. Robinette tracks down Halsey's mistress, and Stone tracks down some shady business with a parking ticket collection company. Robinette also learns that it may be true that his friend Jefferson really is corrupt.
She did say he couldn't figure out how this was happening since he had a deputy police commander in his pocket.
While Scalise the Stabber and his lawyer are in Stone's office negotiating a plea deal, Robinette comes in and announces that Halsey really did die, for realsies this time. Stone gets Scalise to agree to wear a wire to try to get incriminating evidence on his higher-ups, including Police Commander Jefferson. Since William Jefferson is so high up in the police department, Stone doesn't think he can trust the NYPD to set up the wire, so he goes to FBI agent William H. Macy for outside assistance. Halsey wears a wire to dinner at a fancy restaurant where all the major players except Big Frank Masucci are there. Stone and the others listen on these sweet, state-of-the-art 1988 headphones, while the bigwigs at the table incriminate themselves. They also watch as two known associates of Frank Masucci enter the bar, but because the headphones back then were so huge and yellow, the FBI agents in the bar can't be communicated with, and the Masucci associates proceed to blow Scalise the Stabber turned rat away right there in the restaurant. The corrupt cops and councilmen are arrested, and the episode ends with Stone giving his opening statement in the trial against them. This episode was loosely inspired by a parking bureau scandal in Queens in 1986. In my opinion, this really is a great pilot episode for selling the series. It's ripped from the headlines, has a grand scope for a Law & Order episode, and a very dramatic ending. However, I can see why NBC chose not to run it first. Even though this was the pilot, Prescription for Death did the better job of introducing the show and the characters to a brand new audience, and the production was far more indicative of what the audience could expect in future episodes. Also, here's an Easter egg for you. This voice right here, heard during the stakeout that got Scalise killed,
Look at that. Do you believe these guys?
is apparently the voice of Stephen Zernkilton, the guy who reads the famous "In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by two separate yet equally important groups" opening. At least that's what Wikipedia says. This episode introduces one final trope of Law & Order, reusing guest stars for different characters. Regular viewers were in for a shock 3 weeks later when the late Councilman Halsey's wife reappeared in episode number 8 on my list, which was episode number 9, titled Indifference, written by Robert Palm and directed by James Quinn. We open on an elementary school classroom scene, and a little girl named Dee Dee is severely injured, and paramedics are called. Greevey and Logan show up, and the teacher, Ms. Perez, said she knew this was going to happen. Dr. Babcock, the principal, is trying to downplay things, but it clearly does not look good. Greevey and Logan go to the home of Dee Dee's parents to inform them of the medical emergency, and here we first meet Carla Lowenstein, played by Marcia Jean Kurtz. She was the same actress who had played Councilman Halsey's wife 3 weeks ago for anyone watching season 1 during its original run, but she would leave a far stronger impression here. Carla seems out of it, like pilled up out of it,
What are you, brain dead yourself?
and seems far more concerned with finishing her nap than with her injured daughter. She refers to her children as it and shuts the door in our detectives' faces. They go to the hospital to check on Dee Dee, and the doctor tells them the injury was almost surely intentional. The school principal is the standard TV show dickhead,
Why don't you stick to police work, detective?
saying that the teacher, Ms. Perez, went off half-cocked and didn't follow procedure, which of course goes directly through him. Greevey gets intense with the principal, and the principal admits that Ms. Perez had reported the suspected abuse to him several times, and he duly reported that information to Child Protective Services, who were apparently too overworked to follow up on. The CPS lady uses the scroll function on her museum-worthy computer to show the scale of the issue. That's how you know shit was getting serial back in 1990. They had it on a computer.
We kinda have our hands full.
Greevey and Logan track down Dr. Jacob Lowenstein, Dee Dee's father and Carla's husband, and he turns out to be a psychologist with some very strange techniques for his patient. You wouldn't try that taste test in the age of fentanyl, Logan. They interrogate him, and he says that his wife is a very jealous woman who thinks that he is cheating on her when he stays late at the office, which he probably is because he's a scumbag.
She looked so good, I wanted to hit her with a hammer.
When they learn Carla is home alone with their son, they go arrest her and get the kid. They are just in time as Carla is about to scold her child with boiling water. They arrest her, and she is just a total creepy whack job. She is obsessed with her husband Jacob, doesn't care about her kids, and has given me the heebie-jeebies since I started watching reruns of this show in the mid-1990s. Mike Logan tells Greevey a story about how his own mother used to beat him when he was a kid. Logan's mom would drive his dad nuts until Logan's dad smacked his mom, and then the mom would smack him back when Mr. Big was just Mr. Mr. Small. Logan is proven correct when the detectives get a call from Lowenstein's weirdo neighbor they had interviewed previously. If this guy looks familiar, his name is Gordon Joseph Weiss, and he is an actor who has appeared in 10 episodes of various Law and Orders over the years. He says he witnessed Jacob Lowenstein hit Carla the night before Dee Dee ended up in the hospital, and then Carla hit her daughter Dee Dee. He also tells them that this happy, dysfunctional family has been reunited in their apartment of horrors. When they show up, Carla is all messed up, Jacob is all pissed off, and luckily their son seems to be unharmed. Cut to the order portion of the proceedings, and Carla Lowenstein is represented by one of my favorite recurring characters from these early years, Shambhala Green, played by Lorraine Toussaint.
I didn't hear you knock.
That's because I didn't. If I'd have knocked, you'd have heard it.
I don't doubt that.
Ms. Green is a public defender who always fights hard for her clients and seems to have a strong sense of justice. Ms. Green argues, to no avail, that Mrs. Lowenstein cannot afford bail because her husband controls the money. Dee Dee tragically dies, and Robinette and Shambhala Green are talking to Carla Lowenstein, and she is as weird as ever, even temporarily frustrating Ms. Green. The trial gets underway, and Carla's obsession with her husband is as obvious as it could be. Dee Dee's teacher, Ms. Perez, gets up on the stand and details the various evidence of abuse she saw on Dee Dee during the school year. Ms. Perez makes her thoughts about Carla known as she is leaving the courtroom.
Bitch.
Stone decides he thinks the culpability in this case lies with Dr. Lowenstein, and he gets Schiff's blessing to get a plea bargain from Carla Lowenstein to get to Jacob. Stone and Robinette have a meeting with Shambhala Green and Carla gives up the information like it's a Hershey bar.
I killed Dee Dee.
The reasons she presents for this abuse is not something I'm going to type into my laptop or read into my microphone, so you'll have to track down the rerun for yourself. Stone makes the deal, and creepy Carla takes the stand and implicates her husband in being the ringleader of the circus of violence that was going on in their home. Jacob Lowenstein shows his detestable temper and temperament by having a little tantrum in the court.
She's out of her mind!
After Carla Lowenstein testifies, Shambhala Green makes an entrance into Stone's office and informs the ADAs that the real way Jacob Lowenstein makes his living is by selling blow. They bring back the quote-unquote patient that Greevey and Logan caught Dr. Lowenstein in flagrante with and make her testify.
You were smoking it, all right?
And then Stone grills Dr. Lowenstein on the stand. The judge is just as disgusted with this case as I am, and for the first and I think only time ever, there is a disclaimer at the end of the episode saying it was not based on one very specific real-life case. I have to be honest, I don't really like this episode because it's hard for me to watch, but it sticks in my mind so much that I had to put it on the list. The Lowensteins are truly detestable people, but Marcia Jean Kurtz's portrayal of Carla Lowenstein really stands out in particular, and my hat is off to her. She nailed that part completely, and it is an early example of one of the things that makes Law & Order such a strong show. The acting chops of the actors they bring in as guest stars, or maybe the casting chops of the casting directors, or maybe a bit of both. At number 7, we have episode 12, Life Choice, written by Dick Wolf, David Black and Robert Stewart Nathan, and directed by Aaron Lipstadt. We open on a bunch of future Donald Trump voters protesting at an abortion clinic. And here's a fun fact from the past. When this episode aired, abortion was legal in all 50 of these United States. Someone calls in a bomb threat to the abortion clinic, a couple of uniformed cops help clear everyone out, and then it turns out the caller wasn't kidding around because the place explodes. Cue the intro. The investigation opens with a shot of the oldest fire truck I've ever seen, and Greevey and Logan learn that the offending device was a pipe bomb made of diesel and fertilizer with a basic quartz clock timer, and there was one fatality. Sandra Turner, a young woman with a university ID. The initial suspicion is that she was the one who carried the bomb in. Greevey expresses his sympathy for the anti-abortion people, and Cragen basically tells him to get over it and go investigate the case. They figure out the university ID is a fake, so they check out the anti-abortion groups in the area. They meet a lady named Rose Schwimmer who runs one of these groups, and Logan lays it out to her straight.
Look, let's get this clear. Abortion is a right in this country.
See, things really were different back then. Greevey and Logan go check out Schwimmer's alibi at some weird cafe called Lazy Jane's, and they learn that sweet-smelling Rose met a friend there with a large package of some sort.
I mean, it was the size of a toaster oven. I put it on the chair. This isn't a diner.
Our detectives go back to the bombed out clinic to try to figure out who their suspected bomber really was, and they get the idea to go check the cars that were towed away from the scene with the dead girl's car keys. Since this was way before keyless entry was standard on cars, Greevey puts the key in the holes while Logan drools over a Porsche 356 replica. Turns out the victim was a very religious 22-year-old named Mary Donovan. Her family is very religious as well, but they seem to have no knowledge of her being involved with any anti-abortion group. She worked as a teacher at a religious school and had asked for the day of the bombing off. Her boyfriend Patrick works there too, and he lets the cops know that Mary hated abortion. He also lets them know that, quote, everyone, unquote, knows who David's sister Rose is down at the anti-abortion joint. They go back and take another run at Ms. Schwimmer and finally ask who her unknown dining compatriot with the package was. Turns out this person was Celeste McClure, and she works at the community garden. If that's not a made-up Law and Order fictitious-ass job, I just don't know what is. Of course, they have fertilizer at the community garden, but the particular bag they find is not the type one would use in New York, apparently.
You must be one hell of a gardener. What, do you grow palm trees in your backyard?
It was a very strong stroke of luck that Logan found that empty bag of fertilizer because it matches the type of fertilizer used in the bomb, and fingerprints on the bag match partial fingerprints on the bomb fragments. Remember, kids, if you're going to commit terroristic acts based on shaky ideological grounds, make sure to destroy the evidence.
Do not commit crimes with checks. Come on, man. You cannot, if you're going to break the law, do not write a check.
They arrest and charge Celeste McClure with the crime. Stone turns out to be against abortion as well, although he's not as much of a dick about it as Greevey is. Schiff then has the most prescient thing to say about abortion that has ever been said.
Look at us. 3 men talking about what rights women should have over their own bodies. Now, doesn't that strike you as a little one-sided?
Schiff also points out they have no evidence of a connection between Celeste McClure, who seems to have made the bomb, and Mary Donovan, who seems to have planted it. The DAs suspect Schwimmer is the connection, but McClure doesn't want to give up her boss, not so much out of loyalty, but more out of martyrdom. Robinette tries to figure out the connection, and he learns that Mary had an argument with her boyfriend the morning of the bombing, and Mary's older brother tried to break it up. Everyone is stonewalling at this point, but they figure out that Mary Donovan's boyfriend's fingerprints were on the fake ID card she had with her when she was killed by the bomb. They get the bomber's boyfriend and brother in the same room and drama ensues, and then we find out the real truth. Mary Donovan was not there as a bomber, she was there for an abortion, despite her religious background and apparent anti-abortion views. With this new information, Stone convinces the fresh-faced McClure to flip on Rose Schwimmer, and the trial commences. The political tension rises, but Rose Schwimmer refuses to take a plea because she wants to put the victim on trial for wanting an abortion in the first place. McClure takes the stand and implicates Schwimmer as the ringleader of the conspiracy, and then against the advice of counsel, Schwimmer herself takes the stand and admits to the violent acts, but claims they are not against God's laws or God's will. Stone objects, and Schwimmer tries to go after him verbally, saying they did their research and they know he was baptized and takes communion and blah blah blah. The courtroom becomes quite chaotic, but Stone has just one question and hits Schwimmer with the coup de grace.
If abortion is murder, no matter how you feel about Mary Donovan, aren't you guilty of the murder of her unborn child?
This exchange shows why I will always prefer Ben Stone to Jack McCoy. McCoy would have shouted that line at the top of his lungs with his mop of hair flopping around all over the courtroom. Stone just hits her with it, and it's a much more powerful scene because of it. He gets his conviction. This episode is almost 35 years old as I type this. As a lifelong liberal, I think the overturning of Roe v. Wade was an absolute tragedy. I never personally liked abortion, but I'm an American who believes in freedom, so I would never want to abridge someone else's rights. But if you're on the left side of the aisle politically, you have to respect and hopefully study and emulate what the quote-unquote pro-life movement did. They worked unceasingly for 50 years and made horrific and nonsensical compromises to get what they wanted.
If the law hadn't changed, I'd be a slave. You can't turn back the clock.
Unfortunately, it turns out that you can, Paul. Like I said, if you're involved in any sort of political movement, you could do well from this political playbook. As for me, I'm tired of voting for losers, so I've changed my voter registration to unaffiliated on the off chance that somebody comes up with a candidate I can believe in. Other than that, I'm out. I'm a straight white man, so the system will always look out for my benefits whether I vote or not. I personally no longer see the point in voting for other people's best interests when they themselves vote against them so often. Good luck, babes. At number 6, I'm picking Season 1's 2-part episode, The Torrents of Greed. Written by Michael Duggan and Michael S. Chernuchin, and directed by E.W. Swackhammer. This episode opens with 2 cops waiting for a convenience store to open so they can buy lottery tickets for a giant $26 million jackpot. The store is closed because the proprietor is inside getting his ass whooped by some unseen assailant. The uniforms get tired of waiting and go check it out, and they finally realize what happened. Cue the opening credits. Greevey and Logan track down a homeless guy who goes by Edgar Hoover and witness the assailant leaving the shop after tuning up the convenience store owner. Mr. Hoover says that the assailant was very well dressed, indicating this was probably not a run-of-the-mill robbery.
Mean-looking fancy suit, like Donald Trump.
Greevey and Logan suspect a mafia connection, but the victim's daughter swears none of the regular mob stuff, like gambling, drugs, or borrowing money from a loan shark, are applicable. But they did get a suspicious call from a guy named Palevsky at the store. The homeless guy picks a guy named Palevsky with a long rap sheet out of a photo album, and they now have a suspect. The detectives figure out that the Masucci crime family is pushing untaxed bootleg cigarettes on local businesses, and that's probably why the Russian convenience store owner got beat up.
That cheap cigarette hijacking. No, fuck him! I want my money!
They connect a warehouse where the bootleg cigarettes come from to a property owner who's married to Frank Masucci's sister. As a side note, apparently 3 packs of smokes cost around $6.75 in New York City in 1990.
Let me have a pack of those. Pack of those. Pack of those.
$6.75.
Greevey, Logan, and Cragen present the convoluted cigarette conspiracy they've uncovered to Stone. This guy Palevsky is a long-standing associate of this guy Zalta, who rents a warehouse where the bootleg cigarettes were found from this guy Harv Beagle, who is the mafia boss Masucci's brother-in-law. Stone and Schiff lament the fact that Masucci is so hard to bust after they watch Masucci getting interviewed by reporters on TV. During the interview, Masucci claims to know nothing about a missing union boss.
Your involvement with the disappearance of Union President Russell Mackey?
What do I look like? A travel agent?
Cut to Harv Beagle in Stone's office saying he has knowledge of the missing union boss's hit ordered by Frank Masucci. Everyone rolls on Masucci and they charge him with the murder of the union boss. At the end of the trial, Palevsky seemingly flubs his testimony on the stand, and Masucci's lawyer with his weird gray beard and dark hair pounces on that discrepancy, which gets the case dismissed. End part 1. Part 2 opens with Stone prosecuting Zalta and Palevsky on the assault on the Russian candy store owner, who is still alive but confined to a wheelchair. All the primary cast members lament the failure of the previous trial, and Adam Schiff decides they should try to go after Masucci for the kidnapping of the union boss, since they can't retry him for the murder because of double jeopardy. Robinette tricks some judge into giving them a very broad warrant to tap phones, and Cragen puts Fenton and Vitello on surveillance duty. These are 2 more of my favorite recurring characters from early Law & Order, especially Vitello, the female detective with the world's driest affect.
I live for assignments like this. Makes me hotter than a firecracker.
I totally would have watched a spin-off series with her as the main character. Through the surveillance, they figure out Harv Beagle is bribing a city building inspector to look the other way on his numerous code violations in his residential buildings. This leads to Stone charging Beagle for bribing a public official, which somehow leads Greevey and Logan getting Robinette to get a judge to take a year off some convicted hitman's sentence if he goes out to the yard and gives Palevsky the kiss of death. Also, check out this sweet VCR in the drawer setup. High-tech stuff. Palevsky tells Stone that Beagle is very deeply involved with Masucci's criminal activities. They lean on Beagle some more and get him to give up the fact that he helps orchestrate hits with Masucci's top mechanic. We get some more surveillance action with Vitello.
$20 says Ossobuco at Primavera. They got a white wine and mushroom sauce that dances on your tongue.
And they lose the limo that Beagle is riding in. After this, Beagle comes up missing, and there is pretty strong evidence that Beagle's wife, who is Masucci's sister, is extremely pissed off at Masucci because the cops smartened her up to the fact that Masucci probably had her husband killed. Masucci's sister tips them off to where they can find the bodies of the people her brother has had killed, and we get a sweet shot of the Twin Towers at night while they dig up corpses, including Beagle's. Masucci gets arrested but ends up making bail thanks to his sister posting $1 million to bust him out. Greevey and Logan track Masucci down to rearrest him, and they catch up with him just in time to watch him get machine gunned by assassins.
Frankie!
The Law & Order crew all stand around and marvel at the fact that Catherine Masucci managed to do what they couldn't, put Big Frank out of business. Hey, you don't mess with this woman.
Slipper socks, medium.
At number 5, we have episode 7, By Hook or by Crook, written by David Black and directed by Martin Davidson. This one opens up with 2 officers on horseback in Central Park who come to the aid of an apparent mugging victim. The guy is still alive, but he's in bad shape because he has suffered a blow to the head, a heart attack, and last but not least,
his underpants were on backwards.
Turns out the Vic is an older, overweight gentleman named Irv Diamond who was horny as a toad, according to one of his female employees who he had asked out to dinner, and the bartender that served him the night before he was found in the park. Greevey and Logan are eternally lucky, so they end up finding the hotel the Vic had stayed in right as the maid had cleaned out his room from the night before. They find a newspaper open to the Personals for Pleasure section, and they happen upon a hotel porter who brought Irv Diamond a bottle of champagne, 2 glasses, and witnessed him with a farm-fresh blonde on his bed discussing billiards with him. They go to a pool hall and figure out which escort service the farm-fresh blonde probably came from, and Greevey goes undercover to bust Jolene, the farm-freshest escort in all of Manhattan. While booking her at the precinct, sweet typewriter Greevey, Logan comes in and announces Diamond has cashed in his chips. Jolene says that during the evening's festivities, Diamond had a heart attack, and they thought he was dead, so she had her driver take care of him. The driver says that Jasmine, the madame as it were, instructed him to dump the guy in the park and make it look like a mugging, so he bopped the guy one on the head. Greevey does some more undercover work at the brothel and busts Jasmine. Greevey and Logan are waiting at Jasmine's arraignment, and they're very impressed at the speed with which Jasmine's lawyer gets her out on bail.
I'm only as quick as the guy I'm with. You look like under a minute.
This is something that bothers me often while watching Law & Order. I am confident that real-life run-of-the-mill detectives do not have the time or the inclination to go to the arraignment of a suspect in one of their cases, and then go spend all night in the law library researching the attorney who got Jasmine out on bail. Once again, be thankful for computers, kids. They figure out the lawyer had represented Poppy Catering, which is the front company for the escort service, and they also learn that Poppy Catering is owned by a very wealthy New York heiress and socialite named Laura Winthrop. Greevey and Logan go arrest Laura Winthrop at a fancy pants dinner. She ends up in night court for the arraignment, and we get some comic relief from the peanut gallery.
The moral fiber of this community.
You hear that, Andrew? Fiber. I told you we all need fiber.
Ladies and gentlemen.
The investigation continues, and it turns out Laura Winthrop's Poppy escort serves some very high-profile clients, like Heidi Fleiss before Heidi Fleiss. They also discover that the sexy farm girl Jolene has tested HIV positive, and Stone and Robinette personally go to her apartment to give her the bad news and convince her to testify against Winthrop. The trial starts, and we get some more courtroom comedy.
Whatever she does, is it hard on the heart?
She's hard on everything.
Yes, you heard that right. During season 1 of Law & Order, they occasionally used a laugh track during the courtroom scenes. The show was actually pretty well formed right out of the gate. The pace of the earlier episodes might be a little bit slower than the newer ones, but other than that, the formula is all there. I'm glad they stopped using the laugh track, though. The trial goes on, and as he almost always does, Schiff advises Stone to take a plea bargain. I always loved Adam Schiff as a character on the show. He has this smooth grandpa energy and is typically very level-headed, but he is very conservative when it comes to trial strategy. Winthrop takes the stand to try to cast herself in a benevolent light with the jury, saying she required her girls to carry health insurance and get tested for HIV regularly. Stone pretty well shreds her on the stand, pointing out that she's had to fire about a dozen of her prostitutes in the past for testing positive for HIV, and she has never done anything to help or even check on them afterwards, and she never informed any of her male clientele that they had sexual relations with someone who may have been HIV positive at the time. Schiff gets his wish, and Stone takes a plea, with Laura Winthrop stepping into the arena and calling her own shot.
How about involuntary manslaughter? I can be out in 5 years, right?
2.5 of good behavior.
I'm always on my best behavior, Mr. Stone.
That's not the part of their anatomy the girls were most involved with.
Answer the question, Mr. Molina.
At number 4, we have episode 3, The Reaper's Helper, written by David Black, Robert Stewart Nathan, and Thomas Francis McElroy, and directed by Vern Gillum. This one opens with Greevey and Logan hoofing it up some stairs.
Don't worry, Max, it's just 3 more flights.
To find an apartment that looks like it's been ransacked and contains a victim with a .38 caliber hole in his head. The detectives initially suspect a drug angle since the murder looks like an execution with a staged robbery. Greevey and Logan investigate the Vic's life, talking to his parents first. The only pertinent fact they learn here is that the victim had a .38 pistol in his apartment. They ask questions around the victim's place of work and they get directed to a pretty girl who runs a gourmet sandwich cart. She lets the detectives know that Bobby Holland, the victim, was gay, and he went to a bar called Paradise Lost the night that he was killed. They check out Paradise Lost and learn that Bobby was in there with an upscale-looking guy wearing a silk jacket the night he was murdered. Back at the precinct, Logan teaches Greevey the test to know if someone is gay.
They look you in the eye. If your left eye blinks before your right eye, they know you're gay.
Cragen comes in and informs them that they found the murder weapon with no fingerprints on it, and it was registered to their murder victim. The detectives pay another visit to Bobby Holland's parents, and his mother is in pure denial about him being gay. The dad accepts it, but certainly doesn't understand it. Acceptance of gay people was at a much different level 35 years ago in the United States. The father does mention that Bobby had mentioned one guy he was dating, a guy named Angel, who Greevey and Logan had previously met at Holland's job site. Angel tells them that he and Bobby had broken up, much to his dismay, and Holland was seeing a new guy named Jack that he had met at the gym. Greevey then has a spontaneous and fortuitous recollection of an article he had read in a magazine recently about a gay man who was shot in the head in San Francisco with a very similar MO. They go through some magazines, find the article, and figure out there were similar cases in both LA and San Francisco, and put together the fact that all 3 victims, including their victim in New York, had the same phone number for a Jack Curry in New York in their address books. They get an arrest warrant, and Greevey demonstrates some of the ego that kind of defines his character.
Bust the door and then stand back. My partner and I will go in first. It's our collar.
But really defines the actor who plays him, but we'll get to that in the Season 2 Top 10 review. After an arrest scene that was probably much more stressful than it needed to be, they have the infamous Jack Curry in custody. Jack has a hotshot civil rights lawyer named Julia DeBakey representing him at the interrogation, and he drops the bombshell that all 3 of the alleged victims in this case had AIDS and wanted to die. He simply helped them do the final deed. This throws the investigators for a loop. They learn that all 3 victims, including Bobby Holland, did have AIDS, and Stone gets conflicting stories from the victim's parents about his state of mind. Bobby's old man said that Bobby had asked him to shoot him, but he couldn't do it, and the homophobic mom admits to Stone that she knew her son was gay, but somehow she had some letters he had gotten about going on AZT, which at the time this episode was made was the state-of-the-art AIDS medication. Stone and Schiff debate how to prosecute the case since gay activists are making a big deal out of it. Schiff is in favor of minor charges because it's good politics. Stone wants to prosecute like a murder because he thinks it is one, regardless of gay or straight. Robinette goes to visit a man who works at an AIDS support center who had talked to Bobby Holland, who said Bobby Holland did not need an angel of death because he wasn't that sick yet. This guy tells Robinette that Bobby did want to kill himself, but he had encouraged Bobby to go on AZT and other experimental drugs, and he presents himself as an example.
I was diagnosed with AIDS when it was still called GRID, for God's sake. I'm still here.
GRID stood for gay-related immune deficiency, and that term originated because AIDS was initially detected in the United States in the gay male community. When it became understood that the disease could be transmitted to people who were not gay men, the name was changed to Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome, or AIDS, as we know it today. The trial gets underway, and various witnesses go over the proper way to treat a person with AIDS, what is right or wrong as far as the suicide question is concerned, and what autonomy gay men, or maybe anyone, should have to end their own suffering. The case takes a turn when Stone gets called a homophobe and gets punched in the face in a hallway at night, and they learn the defendant is HIV positive as well. Stone wants to drop the charges, so he instructs Greevey and Logan to go find some evidence that would justify doing just that. They find the victim's palm prints on the back of a bookcase that was overturned in his apartment, indicating that Bobby Holland himself helped to trash his own apartment before he was shot. Stone has convinced Schiff to drop the charges, which probably irks Schiff because he always wants a plea bargain, until they learn that
woman from Queens just shot her retarded son. She says she got the idea of a mercy killing from the Holland case.
So the prosecution trudges on. Jack Curry ends up taking the stand, and after describing his early AIDS symptoms under direct examination, he admits that he was the one who held the gun and pulled the trigger under cross-examination. Then Curry's defense attorney calls Mike Logan based on some new information she has received, and she gets him to admit on the stand that Stone told him to go find a reason to drop the charges against Curry. The jury ends up acquitting on everything except for one penny ante charge that will give Curry 6 months probation. Julia DeBakey wonders how one of Stone's secretaries called her office to tell her about the Mike Logan tip, and it's heavily implied Stone was in fact the one responsible for that.
I wonder who told a secretary in your office to call me about your conversation with Logan.
I'll have to look into that.
This episode is a very sad one for the characters to go through, and it must have been something of a shock for people who watched it in 1990 and lived somewhere like Minot, North Dakota, where they probably don't have a very visible gay community. It is heartening that in the United States, acceptance of gay people and medical treatment options for HIV-positive people have both increased considerably since this episode aired. We need to be vigilant to not backslide in either of these areas as a country. At number 3, we have episode 17, Mushrooms, written by Robert Palm and directed by Daniel Sackheim. This one starts off with a machine gunning in an apartment building. The victims turn out to be children, one of them an infant less than 1 year old. It is worth noting this episode originally aired on February 26, 1991. 1990 was the year that saw New York City's all-time record for homicides, with anywhere between 2,200 and 2,600 that year alone, depending on what website you look at. All the websites agree that 1990 had the most murders, though, and I'm sure that statistic informed the plot for this episode.
What the hell's the motive anyway? He took my seat, bam. He's looking at my girlfriend, bam. I need them shoes, bam.
The children were at home with their aunt when they got shot, so Greevey and Logan go track down their mother to make a death notification. She is at work cleaning an office building and, hey, it's Lieutenant Anita Van Buren. Actually, it's the actress S. Apatha Merkerson, making her very first ever appearance in Law & Order as the victim's mother, Denise Winters. It's pretty obvious why they considered Miss Merkerson for a regular cast role when the opening came up. She did an amazing job acting in this episode. Cut to the squad room where Cragen, Greevey, and Logan are all pretty edgy, which is understandable given the circumstances. Cragen explains that they call the innocent victims mushrooms because they absorb bullets like in the arcade game Centipede. Since the shooting has all the hallmarks of drug-related violence, they suspect the older brother might have been a dealer. They search the victim's home but find no evidence of such activities. They get a tip from a reluctant witness that the criminal element in that neighborhood congregates at a certain crack house, and then they bust the crack house and find a pile of guns, one of which turns out to be a
Tech-9. Superior spraying power, unsurpassed for penetrating steel doors.
The spraying power thing might be arguably true, but there are far better firearms out there for penetrating steel doors. This gun turns out to be the murder weapon, and this young kid's prints are on the weapon. The detectives still think there is a drug angle with Gregory, the older shooting victim, but Lieutenant Van Buren sets them straight on that one.
Gregory ain't perfect, but he ain't into no dope. I can guarantee you that.
They grill the kid who had his fingerprints on the gun again, and his mom smacks the ever-loving crap out of him and makes him tell the cops what he knows.
You think you can play this fool game with me?
This leads to a couple of kids with sweet Law & Order street names, Diz and T-Ball. The evidence is strong against Diz and T-Ball. T-Ball was the shooter and Diz got him the gun from his cousin, but the cops still have no idea why that particular apartment got shot up. T-Ball finally tells them that a big-time drug dealer hired him to do it because some guy named Mr. K burned him on a real estate deal to the tune of $300,000. To put it politely, the building that the shooting took place in didn't look like anyone in there had ever burned anyone out of $300. The truth comes out at the trial, and the ultimate tragedy of all this is the shooter didn't know how to read. He went to 315 Jacobs Place instead of 315 Jameson Place on accident. Society had failed this child to such a degree that he had learned how to use a Tech-9 before he learned how to read. Stone gets his conviction on the main drug dealer who ordered the hit and plea bargains from everyone else involved.
I'm thinking, what about the boy who did pull the trigger? He'll be back out in 7 years. My baby would have been 8 years old then. Would you be satisfied?
At number 2, we have episode 13, A Death in the Family, written by David Black and Joe Viola and directed by Gwen Arner. This one starts off with a bang, literally, as a body falls from an upstairs apartment onto a squad car just as Greevey and Logan pull up to look for a murder suspect who was released on bail accidentally. Our detective heroes go upstairs to the apartment where the man took a flyer, and the lady in there says Brutus Walker, her boyfriend and the fugitive in question, threw the man out the window. Meanwhile, the two uniformed cops are up on the roof looking for Brutus, and 2 shots ring out. and one of the officers is shot and killed. They call for a bus, although they don't start calling that until the days of SVU. Roll the intro. All the cops are understandably upset about one of their own getting murdered, and Profaci declares he would be happy to perform extrajudicial Judge Dredd-style punishment if given the opportunity.
I'd shoot him in the face.
Greevey and Logan go up on the roof with Officer Sandoval, the partner of the slain Officer Rennick, and she is understandably touchy, but a little bit light on details. Then they go down and talk to the building superintendent, who is surprisingly unsympathetic to their cause.
Never could figure out what all the fuss was about when a cop gets killed.
But they find a red jacket that had been recently discarded in the alley behind the shooting. They track down the owner of the red jacket, who turns out to be a girl in high school, and she dramatically pulls a pistol on our detectives. They get her to put the gun down, and it turns out she found that gun in the alley where she left her jacket, and it turns out that gun was stolen from a gun shop, and it turns out it was the same gun that killed Officer Rennick. Both Brutus' girlfriend with the amazing cheekbones and Brutus' sister, who is more like his mama, claim that that particular firearm did not belong to Brutus. Greevey and Logan check on Officer Sandoval again, and she is very angry and standoffish. Everyone handles grief differently. I dealt with mine by buying a V12 Mercedes a couple of years back, but even still, Sandoval is starting to seem weirdly suspicious. Brutus Walker's lawyer visits Cragen's office and asks for immunity for his client in exchange for testimony, and the homicide detectives of the 37th Precinct are none too amused with this prospect. Greevey and Logan roust one of Brutus' friends and then track down Walker after Greevey gets a message on his pager letting him know an officer spotted the vehicle he was driving. They make the arrest without pulling a Profaci on him. For once, Schiff doesn't want a plea bargain. He is getting a lot of media pressure about the case, so he wants a strong conviction. After getting a bit of a tongue lashing, Stone and Robinette discuss the fact that their case against Walker isn't really that strong.
Oh, I never said we could prove Walker was on the roof.
Robinette can't figure out how Walker got the gun he shot Rennick with, and his lawyer is now pestering Stone for a deal, but he gets the same frosty reception he got from Cragen on this front. They learn that Officer Rennick was on the case of the gun store robbery where the gun that killed him originated from, which makes the case all that much more mysterious. They ask Rennick's widow about it, but she says it wasn't one of his guns. Stone admires the CDs and the giant rear projection television in their living room that probably weighed more than my aforementioned Benz.
This television. This is nice.
And Rennick's widow explains that he always worked the maximum overtime. Robinette runs into Sandoval at the police station and tries to ask her some questions, and she weirdly tells him to talk to her lawyer, weirdly because she has never been a suspect. Yet.
Look, officer!
What are you different? Just stupid. I told you talk to Bridges.
They figure out Rennick never worked 1 minute of overtime and had expensive tastes beyond CDs and TVs. Robinette visits an old car dog in what appears to be a Mitsubishi dealership, and he said Rennick bought 2 new cars every year, a station wagon for himself and a Corvette for the missus. Paul seems to be surprised that Rennick's wife would want a Corvette, but the salesman refers to her as a hot blonde.
Who are you kidding? That foxy blonde? Hell of a looker for a widow. She may want the vet, yeah.
This is the first clue Rennick had some action on the side. This scene bothers me because as far as I can tell, Mitsubishi didn't offer a station wagon in the US market in 1990, and how the hell are you going to buy a new Corvette at a Mitsu store? Anyway, that's my problem. We are introduced to Rennick's side piece, who has the second best set of cheekbones in this episode, and we learn that Rennick was paying all of her bills, a true kept woman. Rennick would also give her envelopes full of money to hold. The date she got these envelopes coincided with drug raids that Rennick and Sandoval did. One of those drug raids involved the murder of a drug dealer named Ricky Powers, and Ricky's upstairs neighbor said the voice of the man who shot poor little Ricky and the voice of the first male cop on the scene were the same voice. Rennick.
That's when my blood ran cold.
They take Sandoval back up onto the roof to go over what happened again, and she finally spills the beans. Rennick was lifting money from the drug bust, but she wouldn't take any, and she figured it was only a matter of time before Rennick tried to kill her because of what she knew. She started keeping a micro cassette recorder running in her jacket when they were on duty, and it was running the night of the shooting. What it reveals is that Brutus was running from the cops and off the roof by the time the shooting occurred. Rennick came up behind Sandoval and took a shot at her and missed, and she pulled her drop piece out of her ankle holster and clipped him in the neck. The same drop piece that Rennick gave her when they first partnered up, just in case she had to put it in a dead scuzzball's hand. Game over. Stone brings her before the grand jury but asks for justifiable homicide. Officer Sandoval gets off with nothing more than a pink slip. I like this one because of the twist conclusion and the search for truth that feels spearheaded by Robinette specifically, but Stone, Greevey, and Logan did their part too. And finally, we get to the #1 episode of Season 1 of Law & Order, at least according to me, Episode 20, The Troubles. Written by Dick Wolf and Robert Palm, and directed by John P. Whitesell II. This one opens with Greevey and Logan waiting with some other cops to pick up some federal prisoners who are going to turn state's evidence. When the van finally shows up, the 3 prisoners are shackled together in the back, but only 2 of them are breathing. A territorial pissing contest ensues with the federal authorities wanting to take the surviving prisoners back into their custody, and the local cops wanting to keep the prisoners to be able to investigate the homicide. Greevey's ego notwithstanding,
prioritize my ass. I'm senior on the scene. It's my homicide.
The feds win the battle. Greevey and Logan go to the federal prison to interview the 2 other guys who were chained to the dead guy. The first one is a Cuban drug dealer who doesn't speak English anywhere near as well as Tony Montana. The second one is an Irishman who claims to be being held as a political prisoner because he is a member of Sinn Féin, the political wing of the Irish Republican Army. Greevey and Logan are both Irish, but only Logan is taken by the charms of the suspect, O'Connell.
Sure, we had a couple of Logans down Dingle Way. One had the pub, the other had the funeral parlor.
That about covers it.
Logan is convinced the Cuban drug dealer killed the victim Mustafa, but Greevey is not so sure. The detectives go question Mustafa's family at the store, but they have not been informed of Mustafa's death. Greevey and Logan rectify that oversight, which leads to the consternation of the feds because they were trying to pretend Mustafa was still alive for intelligence reasons, and Mr. Mustafa's family's relocation back to Lebanon.
Move to Beirut. Gee, some people get all the breaks.
Greevey and Logan find some faxes in Arabic in the trash by Mustafa's shop, and when translated they indicate Mustafa was involved in shipping drugs and weapons, and Greevey and Logan learn the IRA is involved with this business to get the weapons and make some money. They want to interview the Cuban drug dealer about this, but he turns up dead, hung in his jail cell. A lucky trip to an Irish pub helps Greevey and Logan learn there is a prison guard who the IRA boys are very happy with.
Who let this IRA motherfucker in my bar?
In another amazing piece of luck, it turns out this prison guard, Patrick McCarter, was on duty when the Cuban drug dealer died in jail, and he was the first one to the Cuban's cell. They have McCarter, the Irish prison guard, dead to rights on that murder, so they turn him against the big Irish patriot, O'Connell. More wrangling between New York authorities and federal authorities goes on, and a British intelligence officer named Mr. Fenwick gets involved as well.
You poke a lamp under the sheets, and you'll find strange bedfellows doing some very nasty things together.
O'Connell ends up taking the witness stand on his own behalf, trying to charm the jury and everyone else into thinking that he was a child of God in Ireland and had never committed a violent act in his life.
I've never even thrown a punch.
Mr. Fenwick's posh ass gets with Stone and tells him he has a rebuttal witness to refute O'Connell's claim of being a pacifist. A lady named Bridget McDearman shows up in court and tells the story of how O'Connell left a bomb on a street in 1981 that killed her husband and 2 children. She unequivocally identifies O'Connell as the bomber, and the episode ends with Adam Schiff giving a press conference telling the public how great the interagency cooperation between the New York police, DA's office, federal authorities, and international intelligence was, despite the fact they all basically annoyed the crap out of each other throughout the entire episode. Hey, all's well that ends well, I guess. The Troubles gets the nod from me as the best episode from Season 1, mostly due to the charm of the murderer, because I'm a sucker for a bad boy. It's also a great story with another dramatic twist ending, and I'm a sucker for those too. So that's it. That's my top 10 list of the best episodes from Season 1 of Law & Order. This is a project that is very time consuming, and I do have a full-time job and another YouTube channel that I run. So if you did like this video, please subscribe to this channel, like the video, and stay tuned because I'll probably get working on top 10 for Season 2 as soon as I finish this and upload this and everything else. So leave me a comment, tell me how great I am, and have a great day. Bye-bye.